Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Adam Mintz, we host Madlik Disruptive Torah on Clubhouse every Thursday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, and share it as the Madlik podcast on your favorite platform. This week's Torah portion is Bar Midbar. The Torah counts every Jewish male, every able-bodied male to serve in the army and to pay their share of taxes. And we look at the Haredi demand that they be exempt from military service and subsidized by the state, and we wonder, why? So join us for God Wants You to Serve. So another week of Madlik Disruptive Torah. As you said, Rabbi, next week we are off the air because it is Shavuot, and we don't broadcast on Yantif. We will be learning together, you and I, in the Hampton Synagogue in West Hampton, New York. We're actually going to do a live episode of Madlik on
So
Friday.
Everyone needs to come to West Hampton Beach next Friday afternoon.
Absolutely. We're going to do our first live podcast. We'll see if we should take it on the road or not. But meanwhile, this week we do have Parshat Bamidbar. If you have been listening for a few years, 2 years or so ago, we did talk a little bit about the same subject, and we talked about this requirement to serve in the army. But the focus then was that the tribe of Levi was not asked to serve, and we delved into that. Tonight, we're going in a different direction, and typically Madlik has not been that political. We are disruptive, but we try to keep to the Parsha. I don't think we're going to be political today, but we are going to be discussing something that is in the news, something that if you've been following the news in Israel, there's demonstrations in the streets about this judicial reform. And there are many aspects to it, sides to it, but one of the aspects is there was a court ruling a number of years ago that said that the ultra-Orthodox who want not to serve in the army want to deferm it. We're going to get into some of the reasons why they want it. It's unconstitutional, if you will, because it lacks the sense of fairness. And that is this conflict between the rule of law, the rule of democracy, and religion, and also popularism. The Haredim are claiming that they got the popular vote, they can do what they want. So this is a timely discussion. Let us delve right into the Parsha. We are beginning a new book. It's called Bamidbar, Numbers in English. And it says Numbers 1, 2 through 3, take a census of the whole Israelite company. In my translation, it says of fighters, by the clans of its ancestral houses, listing the names, every male, head by head. You and Aaron shall record them by their groups from the age of 20 years up, all those in Israel who are able to bear arms. So clearly, this is not simply a census. This is the beginning of a draft. The first step of a draft is finding out how many able-bodied, in those days, males you have to be in the army. Now, this is not the first time we've come across this. In Exodus 30:14, it says, everyone who is entered into the records from the age of 20 years up shall give God's offering. So interestingly enough, we have the same kind of cutoff for making a contribution, every Jew giving their half shekel, and every Jew serving in the army, which is kind of fascinating, Rabbi, in terms of the way I pose the question, because I talk not only about serving in the army, but being subsidized by the state. And here the Bible is talking about an obligation to serve in the army and pay your fair share. Fascinating, don't you think?
Absolutely fascinating. I think this is a great topic.
So Rashi says from 20 years old and above, Scripture teaches you here that anyone less than 20 years of age does not go forth to the army, nor is he to be counted among the men. So it's kind of like the rules that we have here about when do you come of age to be able to drink alcohol. When this is when you truly become a man. We all know about 13. That's good and fine. But when it comes to the society and paying and carrying your load, Rashi does make the connection between the two verses. Interesting, the Hebrew, it says a strange word. It says lemishpachotam lebeit avotam b'mispar shemot kol zachar legilgulotam. Gilgul. That is a word in mysticism that refers to reincarnation because it has that sense of legalgel, to be round. The Ibn Ezra says, I've already explained the meaning of Gilgulatam, and he means that it means really a skull, a head. What we're
Right,
really
it's great. I mean, it's the same. I mean, a skull is the same word, which means round.
correct. But to me, what that struck me as is we're not splitting any hairs here. We are counting bodies. This is the ultimate equalizer. We are doing a head count, if you will. And it couldn't smack more of being fair and not distinguishing. Don't give me any excuses here. We're counting heads. That was to me very fascinating. Again, to re-emphasize this connection between serving, bearing arms, and paying the shekels. It's fascinating that in Numbers 1:45-47, towards the end of our first chapter, it says, all the Israelite males aged 20 years and over, enrolled by ancestral houses, all those in Israel who were able to bear arms, all of who enrolled came to 603,550. In Exodus, it says the silver of those of the community who were recorded came in 100 talents. It goes on from the age of 20 years, 603,550. I am not making a drash when I am connecting paying one's taxes, being a part of the economy, and being counted in the army.
Well, that's how they were counted. Say it even better. They have a responsibility, but what it means to be counted is to pay taxes. If you don't pay taxes, you're not counted.
It's pretty clear. Now, did the Bible have a sense of a deferment? Did the Bible? Can we say that no? It didn't get into the weeds. It didn't get into excuses for not serving. No, you can't say that either. In Deuteronomy 24-8, it says, for it is your God who marches with you to do battle for you against your enemy to bring you victory. Then the officials shall address the troops as follows. If there is anyone who has built a new house but has not dedicated, let him go back to his home lest he die in battle and another dedicated it. Is there anyone who has planted a vineyard but has not harvested it? Is there anyone who has paid the bride price for a wife but has not taken her? The official says, if there's anyone who is afraid or disheartened, let him go back to his home, lest the courage of his comrades flag like his. My takeaway from this is, you know what? It even gave us the exceptions. And the exceptions, in terms of one who is afraid, is very logical. In terms of the others, there's a certain, moral understanding here. Someone who's just about to get married, but it does.
Well, he's preoccupied.
Yes. Yeah, I think right? You're right. But do you agree that we can't even make the case that it leaves it to us decide who doesn't get to serve? I don't think you can make that case.
No, for sure you can't make that case. The Torah is very specific about what types of people don't serve. And there are clearly people who are performing a mitzvah. Someone who's going to get married is performing a mitzvah. Someone who's afraid is just afraid they can't go to battle. That's actually to protect the soldiers, right? You don't want soldiers who are afraid, right? So I think that the Torah is very specific in what it's looking for.
So the fact that you said someone who's about to do a mitzvah, already now I'm starting to hear a little bit of what we are going to discover is the Haredi argument, meaning to say there are different ways to serve God. But I would argue with you that it's true they have to do a mitzvah, but it's a timely mitzvah. We're not saying that this is a deferment for life. You are at a certain point in your life, and for you get a buy. So maybe it's a mitzvah that will pass, an opportunity. It's planting the new vineyard, but clearly I think that the Torah that we study has a view of what it is to serve, and it has a view of when the exceptions are, and it certainly is not talking about issuing any blank check.
That is for sure.
So even when I talked about this last, I did talk about this model of what in Hebrew is called Tzava ha'am, a people's army, and I think that one of the unspoken discussions that is going on when pilots decide not to come to their miluim, to their reserve duty, is that because they feel, why should we serve when others are not?
Right.
What's at stake is not so much the preservation of Israel. There is a very easy way out. And the way out is the way we do things in America, which is that you don't have a people's army. You have a professional army. And I think that when you discuss and put the discussion into that perspective, you really realize what's at stake for the uniqueness of Israel. Because what is unique about Israel, unlike the United States, for instance, is when a Knesset member sends the army to war, you know that he's sending his son, he's sending his brother, he served himself. That makes such a big difference. The sense of the purity of the Israeli army is so powerful. It is so important. We always talk about the practical parts, which is that you can't get a good job unless you've served in the right combat unit, and what this is doing to this whole part of the population that isn't serving. But there's also something that cuts to the crux, I think, the core of what makes Israel so unique. And it comes back to these biblical verses that we just discussed.
Yeah, I mean, you're 100% right. I mean, that whole idea of a volunteer army, is something that we take for granted in Israel, that everybody serves, everybody has a play, has a role. I mean, you see that especially on Yom HaZikaron, when they mourn the people who have died. Everybody has somebody, not necessarily someone from their immediate family, but everybody has somebody.
And I think that it's an important part. There's so much that has changed over time with Israel. The kibbutz movement, labor, Zionism, working in the fields, all of that probably has passed, as it does in any society that ultimately becomes successful and first world and all of that good stuff. But this would be such a tragedy, I think, if Israel was to lose it. And so that's why I think to a degree it cuts really to the basis of Israel is right now struggling with who it is. But what's fascinating to me at Madlik is that it goes all the way back to our biblical sources, which is kind of fascinating.
It is really fascinating that this is the issue that the Torah talks about.
So, Rabbi, we did a few sessions on the Haggadah, and we looked at some kibbutz Haggadot, and I said, the protest movement should really create their own Haggadah shel Macha'ah, protest Haggadah. And sure enough, a week or two before Passover,
Pesach, they came up with it.
And I started to study it. There's nothing to me worse than studying the Haggadah after Pesach. So there was a time frame. I got into a few pages, and I even started to translate it. And I have put in the notes, which are a part of right now Clubhouse and this podcast. One, I took an image of the page, but then I actually copied some of the verbiage. And at the end, they all use tropes from the Haggadah, but here's one that I read, and I learned about something I had never known about before. And I'm reading now from this Haggadah. It says, because it is clear that with all their wisdom and cunning, they did not understand how much this night had changed of all nights. And when they say they mean the people who were trying to pull the wool over them and to get this judicial reform. They did not grasp not our determination to fight for what is truly the bedrock of our existence, and not the feeling of mutual guarantee that suddenly returned to us, and not this new refusal. And our surprise is to continue to humbly and self-abnegationally accept the image of the empty wagon. This story ends. The cart is full and overflowing always was. And I saw this phrase, the empty wagon. In Hebrew, it is ha'agalah ha-reka. And I'm embarrassed to say, I had never heard it before. And I Googled it. And it turns out that the Chazon Ish, who was the one of the great founders of the Haredi movement, and Ben-Gurion had a historic meeting. And I have in the notes a link to another Sephirah source sheet that has pictures of it, newspaper accounts of it. It's called The 5 Most Interesting Conversations in Jewish History. And this is one. And he recounts what happened when Ben-Gurion met to meet the Chazon Ish. It says, Ben-Gurion and the Chazon Ish met. The parable of the empty cart. There's the question of existence, of preserving human life, Ben-Gurion recounted, saying to the Chazon Ish, shouldn't love of the people of Israel take precedence over everything? The Chazon Ish responded that although love of Israel and love of Torah may seem like two separate things, they're not, because there is no Torah without Israel and no Israel without Torah. So far, so good.
So far, so good.
Navon, this is Yitzchak Navon, who ultimately became the president of Israel, but was a Mizrahi Jew who really knew his stuff, his Torah. He's writing sometime later about the meeting. He recounted how Rabbi Karlitz, that's the Chazon Ish, responding to Ben-Gurion's query regarding how can we live together, described a scene from the Talmud in which when two camels meet on a path and one of the camels is weighed down with a load, and the other camel is not, the one not carrying the burden must give way to the one who is. The moral of the parable, suggested the Chazon Ish, was that we, the religious Jews, are analogous to the camel with the load. We carry a burden of hundreds of commandments. You, secular Israel, are empty. You have to give way. Ben-Gurion, according to Navon, attempted to mount a counter-argument. The second camel isn't weighed down with the burden of commandments, he asked rhetorically. The commandment to settle the land isn't a burden, and the commandments to defending life aren't mitzvot. And what those boys who you are so opposed to, sitting on the borders protecting you, that's not a mitzvah? The Chazon Ish was not even able to agree, according to Navon, that the learners' lives were protected by those serving in the army. Rather, he insisted that it is only thanks to the fact that we learn Torah that they, the soldiers, are able to exist.
I mean, it's not such a good story. It doesn't paint. I mean, it's a famous story, but it doesn't paint the Chazon Ish very well.
Well, I had never heard of this story, and I certainly would not have been able to refer to it by simply saying ha'agalah ha'reka. So here again is an example of me, for one, learning from a secular Haggadah about something, but clearly in that story, it speaks mountains. about the key argument, because these religious people truly believe that by studying the Torah, they are protecting all of Israel. And they do say that even until today. And maybe they follow the kind of the theme of thought, the thread that you were talking about a little bit when it says you have to get married or you have to plant your vineyard. I don't see it that way. I see this as an example. We've talked in the last few weeks about how you can move Torah widely afar from where it started, and that can sometimes be a positive evolution. I think here it is clear that they are taking the words of the simple verse, the simple condition of equality and serving in the army, and they're corrupting it in a different way. But you're right. I don't think it's certainly not a flattering story, but I do think it is one that is very informing.
It's tremendously informing because basically we would say the dispute, and everything when you deal with rabbis is about the dispute. The dispute is whether the soldiers protect the learners or the learners protect the soldiers. See, that's what the Chazon Ish is saying. It is only thanks to the fact that we learn Torah that the soldiers are able to exist. I don't even know what that means exactly, but Torah makes everything happen. If there was no Torah, there'd be no Israel, there'd be no soldiers, there'd be no nothing. He really believes that. And that was, that created this whole movement, obviously, as post the 1948 war. That's why the yeshiva students were exempt from the army. This is what we're talking about. Because thanks to the fact that we learn Torah, that the soldiers are able to exist.
So one of the fascinating things is that in our Parsha, it mentions the numbers. And I think basically when we talk next week about 600,000 Jews standing at Mount Sinai, are we not using the numbers that I quoted a second ago and rounding them out? And we're really talking about 600,000 men over the age of 20. And that's why people say, and you have to assume there was another 600,000 odd women and maybe another 600.
We say 2 to 3 million people.
But it's based on these same numbers, correct? I mean, when we
say
there was 600,000, it's this
number.
Men
from 20 to 50.
So this is a little bit of a numbers game. And when Ben Gurion and the Chazon Ish met, Eastern European Jewry, the yeshivot, the Ponoviches and the Slabotka, and the great yeshivot of Europe had been decimated in the Holocaust. And maybe there were 400 students who were studying. I quote at length, and I give a link to the Israeli Supreme Court decision invalidating the law on Haredi military draft postponement. It's dated March 2012, and it is literally the target of the people that want to overturn and compel the Supreme Court to issue a similar decree, in fact, legislating that the Haredim do not have to serve. They feel that they have been targeted here, believe it or not. But in this, it goes through the numbers. And, it talks about over the years until 1970, the deferments were about 400 a year. When you get to 1997, you're talking 28,000. When you go to 97, well, in terms of percentages, in 2007, we are at 14% of draftable age are not being drafted. And that's in 2007. And the key, if you want to talk numbers, is that a Haredi family is 6, 7, 8 kids. A typical secular family is maybe 2 if you push it. So this is a ticking time bomb where ultimately you won't have a people's army. And if these people who are not serving or studying in the yeshivot and getting subsidized by the government, you're really talking talking about a welfare state that's not sustainable.
So there are a couple of things that obviously I agree with everything you said. There are a couple of things. Number one is it's important to understand that when Ben Gurion, and the Haredim made a deal, they were exempting 400 people from the army. That was the whole thing. Ben Gurion was willing to make that deal because it was 400 people and it was going to be okay. Now, obviously, now it's gotten totally out of hand. But that's, they refer back to Ben Gurion, but that doesn't really prove anything because, again, that was just a few people who were studying yeshivot at the time. Now it's really disruptive of society.
Well, absolutely. And what I, as you know, Rabbi, I am privileged to be part of an organization called PEF Israel Endowment Funds, and we enable U.S. taxpayers to give donations to Israeli charities. And we had our annual trustee meeting today. Your wife is, I'm proud to say, one of our trustees, and she's a partner in crime with me. And we invited a certain Rabbi Menachem Bambach to speak. And he started by saying that he immigrated to Israel at the age of 20. And then he says because he lived in Mea Sharim, he didn't speak Hebrew, he didn't speak English. He came from another planet, he said. And between that time and now, he's gotten a second degree at Hebrew University. And he has recently wrote, and I have a link to it in the notes, as of May 1st, 2023, just 2 weeks ago, in the Times of Israel, a blog post called A Haredi Call for Compromise Between Religious and Secular. And I suggest you all read the whole thing. I am going to read some excerpts. He says, the statistics do not lie. The reality is that the Haredi sector is expanding and will eventually become the majority in Israel. This successful and prosperous country may soon be entrusted to a religiously observant majority. And who is most concerned about this dramatic possibility? We are. We, Haredim, have no idea how to run a country. There is no precedent in Jewish sources for how to do this. We need to learn the art of responsibility. The reality threatens Israeli society. The feeling that there is a large community that does not pull its weight in Israeli society is frustrating and very concerning. But it is important to understand that Haredi citizens of Israel are also apprehensive. They fear external influences. So he's beginning a discussion. And he talks about that they have to bridge this gap. It is not sustainable. In a sense, Rabbi, what's happening is that when Ben Gurion made the exception for the 400, he was really talking about those who are just married, those who have just planted a vineyard. They were a minority. But 14, 15, 20% of your population, that's not sustainable. And so it is also fascinating that from the verses themselves, we see this development, and this guy is leading a revolution. There are Haredim who initially were afraid to join his schools, to send their kids to his schools. But there is a YouTube video of how he conducts a class on Yom HaZikaron, the Memorial Day for soldiers. And you have to understand that what I said a second ago about Israelis who don't have a son, a sister, a brother, a father who was wounded or killed, in the Haredi community, you have people who have not been affected. They live in an absolute vacuum. So he shows a class hounding out pictures of a little boy crying on his father's grave on Yom HaZikaron. And he literally asks these Haredi children to sympathize, and they do. They want to, and they talk about what it's like. It's so. This is progress. This is, and he talks about who he's reaching out to. He says there are 10% of the Haredim who are really interested. He says, I don't talk to the 40% who are interested in following the herd. He says, the political leaders are interested in getting more tax dollars. That's all they care about. That's the currency of politics. So I don't get any help from them. But he is slowly but surely introducing secular studies, mathematics, history, language to these Haredim. They feel gypped. They feel that they are stolen from. They feel that they have the empty wagon. And that is the fascinating time that we are living with, talking about disruption. This is a disruption that's happening in front of our eyes.
You're 100% right. And, and you say that what Rabbi Bambach is doing actually goes back to the Chumash, and that's the model that we have from the Chumash. That's really to end where we began. That's what you're really saying, that you have to take responsibility. And he's talking about how they're going to learn responsibility, but ultimately it's the fact they have to take responsibility.
And I think the flip side of it, I'm going to go back to what was in the Chiloni, the secular Haggadah. And it talks about we have to be lekabel al atzmeinu, to accept upon ourselves, b'hachna'atna ubitul, by putting aside all of our preconceptions on ourselves. And we have to throw out the dimyoy of ha'agala hareka. We cannot accept that tag that we are an empty wagon. Hasipur hazet nigmar kan. That story is over. Ha'agala mele'a v'gedusha. Tamid hayita. We are full. It really, the flip side of it is for the secular community to not accept that demolition and to say that they are full, that not only, and they have to take back the tradition that has this dichotomy, I think. I think that's part of the problem with what the Chazon Ish said, because I thought for a second he was on the right page when he says Torah goes with Avodah and the nation, and the nation goes with Torah. But the truth is that there's no dichotomy, similar to there's no dichotomy between democracy and Judaism. It's a false narrative. It's all one and the same. And I think that ultimately is what the message of our Parsha is, which is in the book of Numbers. It's ultimately about being counted. And it's about everybody has to carry their load. The one word that every Israeli kid says to another when he's wronged is zelo fair. And that's what we're talking about. Something has to be equal. It has to be fair.
It's really interesting that we take it from the parasha, and you had the protesters Haggadah, and we had the story with Ben Gurion and the Chazon Ish, and then we took it to Rabbi Bambach, and then we take it all the way back. I mean, and what you see is that this is a living tension. And that's something I think that the Haredim would do well to understand, that this is a living tension, something that cuts through the generations. It's not something they made up, but it's something that that's been true for centuries, and for millennia. We started by talking about Codex Sassoon, right, going back to the year 900. This goes back 2,000 years before the year 900. And next week, when we talk about the experience of Mount Sinai, this is really something that goes back all the way to Mount Sinai, to this week's parasha. So thank you, Geoffrey, for these are great sources. This is really, gives us all a lot to think about this week. Want to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. Want to wish everybody a Chag Sameach next week. Again, you're welcome next Friday afternoon to come to the Hampton Synagogue in West Hampton Beach. Geoffrey and I will be there in person for those people who want to see us in person. And we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks from tonight, Parshat Naso. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, and let's all remember that we're all counted, and that is the lesson of the Parsha. It's the lesson of Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah, that we will be celebrating next week. Shabbat Shalom to one and all, and if anyone has any comments or suggestions, well, stick around, and I would love to hear. Lauren, Baruch haba.
I lived through the conscription during the Vietnam War, and there was a very similar dynamic and dialogue during that period of time about, well, are you moral? And if you're moral, you can't serve. And it was a very significant debate. This is a debate that happened, thousands of years earlier. Um, but it's a difficult read for me, because trying to justify the empty wagon for those that are protecting the Israelites came through. Their history was defined through war. They survived through war, and for a group of the more studious, the students of the population to protect themselves by that identity doesn't sit well with me, and I'm glad that you brought it up.
You remind me of the Vietnam War and the fact that when you have a national draft, you have one of the most important checks and balances against an unjust war. When you have a professional army, a mercenary army, you don't have that quite as much. It's too easy to remove what your country is doing and what war it's prosecuting as not affecting on you. But the Vietnam War was a good example where, because there was a draft, and, hey, we know plenty of draft dodgers, but the point is, because there was a draft, it became a national issue. And in Israel, the Lebanon War was a situation where you had demonstrations as big as you're seeing today to get us out. So I do think there's something important about, again, it's funny for a child of the 60s to be talking in support of a draft, but in the end, there is a connection between a draft and the democratic process, because it has to affect us all to ensure that not only do we all carry our weight, but to add an extra check and balance against an unjust war, because it affects everybody.
Yes, this is a long discussion, but can I ask you another quick question? Why is the translation of Bamidbar, which I believe translates to in the desert, in the wilderness, why did the English translation come up as numbers? Now I know there's a discussion of many different types of numbers in this parsha, but is that really what the parsha's the book is all about?
So, it's a great question and a great discussion, because the Hebrew names for books are taken from the first few letters, the same as the names for a parsha. And Bar Midbar, if you look at the opening verses of the parsha, it's the first word that appears in the verses that isn't bread and butter. And God said unto the people, in the midbar. So God said unto the people, there was nothing there. So they picked Bamidbar. And the same goes for Shemot, the book of Exodus. Elu Shemot. These are the names. They called it Shemot. The Hebrew names for these books, to be perfectly honest, are not good at all. They're not descriptive at all. If you look at the English words, Genesis and Bereshit is a good one. Right. Genesis is the genesis of the world. It is the creation. And Bereshit is in the beginning. So that kind of works. Exodus and Shemot, I vote for Exodus every day of the week. Exodus is what it's about. If you look at this, we are starting and we're talking about taking a poll and counting. Numbers is not a bad name. Bamidbar means just in the desert. So I don't have a trouble with the English word numbers. I do have a trouble with the Hebrew word. And the same goes, by the way, for Devarim. Deuteronomy means duo, is two. It's Mishneh Torah. It is a repetition of the Torah. We call it Devarim, Elu Devarim. These are the things. It's the second word that appears. The Hebrew names are losers as far as I'm concerned. The English names at least make a stab at being descriptive in terms of the subject matter of the book.
Very little correlation to what we're getting into. So
It all gets back to the codex, my friend. If you look at a Torah scroll, you don't even know when one chapter begins and one chapter ends. We learn that from these codexes, and they are the ones that divided things up into the different chapters and into the different books. So it's a fascinating discussion, but it does go back to the codex, which is now the $38.5 million question. Anyway, Lauren, have a great Shavuot. Great to hear your voice, and we'll see you in a fortnight.
Shabbat Shalom.
Okay, Shabbat Shalom.